Today we're talking about Psalm 126, and I think it's an interesting psalm because I think it's out of time. A lot of the psalms deal very generically with God and man. You have those that deal specifically with David. He talks about his iniquity and the goodness of God. He talks about, we talk about the Messiah coming and different aspects of that. This one, I think, is connected more with the Babylonian captivity. Later, when we see that God wipes the city of David, Jerusalem, like a dish, except for a remnant, he takes into to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar to be preserved there for 70 years, and then he brings them back under Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah. And I think that this is tied with that. When the Lord turned again to the captivity of Zion, we were like them that dream. Then was our mouth filled with laughter and our tongue with singing. Then said they among the heathen, the Lord hath done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, wherefore we are glad. Turn again our captivity, O Lord, as the streams of the south. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. They that bring forth and weeping shall bearing precious seed shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. Again, I think that the word captivity here it's an interesting word. That to turn your captivity isn't turn you to captivity, but to bring you from captivity. That you're turning captivity off. That you're bringing us from. The idea that sow in tears shall reap in joy. That there were people who saw the first glory of the temple. Maybe they were 10, 15, 20, something like that. And then they went 70 years into Babylon and came back. It says that they wept. There were people who hadn't seen it who were with joy going back in to rebuild and grow. But those was weeping also for those that had seen the glory and now see what God had done. But they were the seed being sown. They were the seed coming back to be sown to rebuild and create glory here for God in the city of God in Zion. So that's what this is. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. There is tears and joy. Have a relationship. They weep forth with precious seed. Here they are coming across from Babylon. They are the precious seed. They have their young children with them. They have their families with them. And probably a mixed multitude that want to go in and back to the city of God. And they are the seed. And they're bringing sheaves also. That there will be sustenance there in the city of God. And there will be sustenance there from God for Israel. Israel will be redeemed. I think that this has a lot to say about that. And so I think you need to read that, do the grid work on it, see what it's saying. But it's a very wonderful verse, and I think we've read 5 and 6. I've heard many sermons on reaping in tears, sowing in tears, reaping in joy. And many times in our Christian life, we do sow in tears and reap in joy. We need to keep in mind that tears and joy go hand in hand many times in our lives. We tend to always push away from the tears and only wanting the joy. Sometimes they just go together. You can't have one without the other. Going back to 2 Samuel, we're picking up in the story, and it's taken a left turn, and it's gotten really bad. Um, David had all these wonderful blessings, and he'd pushed all the enemies away from the north and the south and the east. And so he would now had peace because things have really gone bad. He went from this victorious king who had subdued all the nations around him. God gave him victory to the north, to the south, and to the east. And yet here he is now because of choices that he's made. Everything's going downhill. I was listening to a guy talking about how that his life never seems to recover from these choices. He chooses to have illicit relationships with this woman named Bathsheba and get her pregnant. He chooses to murder Uriah with Joab's help, and then he takes the woman to herself and he thinks everything's fine. But then Nathan comes through a story about a man who had taken another man's lamb, even though he had plenty, and he used this poor man's lamb to make a dinner for a friend, and David thought that was so horrible. And it's interesting what Nathan did through telling the story, draws David in, and then he goes, "You are the man," and he tells him bluntly what he has done, how he had murdered Uriah. You despise the commandments of God to do evil in his sight. God saw it. He did evil in his sight. He killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword and has taken his wife to be thy wife and has slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Even though he didn't physically kill him, God held him responsible for the death of Uriah. And so he was the leader. And therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house. This is sad. Because thou hast despised me and hast taken the wife of Uriah to be thy wife. Behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of the sun. What thou did in secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. When David's supposedly secret sins were brought out, they were brought out for everyone to see. Even today, we think of David and Goliath, but we also think of David and Bathsheba. This sin has followed him. What has it been like? Over almost 2,500 years, and it follows him. Nathan left, and the Lord struck the child and Uriah's wife, the one that Uriah's wife had born, and he goes and fasts before God, but God would not repent, and the child dies. But God is merciful. He sends, he allows David to be with Bathsheba and gives them a son, and this son is named Solomon. Now, Solomon is not going to be the number one son. There were already 6 sons that David had when he was in Hebron before he came to the city of David, before he brought back the Ark of the Covenant. So he has several sons and daughters older than Solomon. But it says the Lord loved him. The Lord loved Solomon. And what I want you to say is the love of God isn't just this warm, fuzzy thing that he feels for us. He just sits there and longs for us. It's not that romantic love. It is a committed love. I am committed to you no matter what you do. It's that father-son love that no matter what you do, the father to the son, I will love you and I will be there committed to you. See me if there's a problem. Come back to me. I am established in your life. That's what commitment means. Commitment is that seed that's in the ground, and the ground is committed to the seed, and the seed is committed to the ground. God is committed to me. He just doesn't love me with this warm fuzzy. And it takes his commitment to keep me in, because even with his commitment on full bore, I'm sometimes wanting to walk away. Jesus talked about this when he, over Jerusalem, how I long for you like a hen longs for the chicks to come under, and you would not. It's very sad. The love of God is a committed love. And even with the committed love, we know later Solomon has Baal worship. But God is committed to Solomon. And there's a story of Joab fighting with Amnon and calls David to get glory because the king should have glory. But we begin in 13 where we meet a lot of characters coming into play. We have Absalom, the third son, and there's the first son named Amnon who loves Absalom's sister Tamar. Now the love there is not love, it's lust. He just wants to have her. She's beautiful, and he allows himself to be fixated on her. Amnon was vexed. This was all he could think of, and yet he can't be with her. But he has a friend, some friend, named Jonadab, who's his cousin. He's the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. And so Jonadab conspires with Amnon and tells him, well, this is how you can get her. And he's being a pickup artist. Amnon is being a predator. And so they come up with a plan. You act like you're sick. Have David send Tamar to take care of you. And so he does. He pretends to be sick, and he asks David, please send Tamar to come and feed me and take care of me because I'm ill. So David does it. Tamar goes to be with him, and then he sends the servants out, and the moment they're out, he goes, come into the bedchamber. I'm not feeling well. I'll lay down. You can feed me in there. The moment he does, he starts forcing himself on her. She resists. She's saying, hey, don't do this. This is folly. Not only will she be defiled, but she even makes the point that you will be defiled. You will be considered a fool. You'll be considered a son of Belial. You'll be a son of folly. And yet, he wouldn't listen to her. She looks out for him as well as herself, but Amnon wouldn't listen. He forced himself on her, and then he hated her. It says that he hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred that he hated her with was greater than the love. And Amnon says, arise, be gone. And she said, there is no cause. This evil is spinning me away is greater than the one that thou didst unto me. Sending her away also. Now that you've taken her to bed, sending her away is even worse. That you're just casting her out, And yet he tells the servants, put this woman out and bolt the door. And she had a garment of divers colors, which was worn by the king's daughters that were virgins, and she tears that up. She's no longer a virgin. This is telling the world she's no longer a virgin, and it's not good. Tamar puts ashes on her head and rent her garment, and she lays her head on his head and went out crying. She was very distraught over this. Absalom, her brother, asks her about it and says, hold your peace. He starts conspiring at that moment. He doesn't move on Amnon. Now, here's an interesting thing, that David heard about it and was very angry. Okay, but what did he do about it? Remember the story of Eli with Phinehas and Hophni? He was upset with what Phinehas and Hophni were doing at the temple. Did he do anything about it? David was the king. He should have moved on this. He should have gone to Jehovah and see what Yahweh wanted to do. He should have looked into the law. What's the law say about rape? What does the law say about a man forcing himself on a woman, on a virgin? And so the law was very clear, if you remember in Leviticus, that when there's certain scenarios where certain things would happen by certain things, a man was never supposed to force himself on a woman. If there was conjugal, both of them willing, then he should marry her. But if there's an unwillingness on her part, that's a crime. He didn't move. He didn't do a thing. And what we see here is this festering of vengeance. There's two ways to deal with sin, either justly or with vengeance. But sin never sits by himself. There's always a victim to sin. And that will create vengeance. That will create hardness. So Absalom spoke neither good nor bad to his brother, but he hated Amnon because he had forced himself on Tamar. And it came to pass after 2 years. Now look at this. We had the conspiracy with Jonadab and Amnon to get Tamar. Now we've got a long conspiracy going with Absalom. And he waits till there's a time of the sheep shearing, and he wants to have a feast, and calls the sons. He came to the king and said, behold, thy servant has sheep shearers. Let the king have beseeched thee, and the servants go with thy servants. He goes, nay, my son, let us not all go up, lest we be chargeable unto thee. But Absalom still pressed the king. Absalom wanted to have a party and have all the sons of the king come over. And David was resistant to this idea for various reasons. But he pressed him that let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. And Absalom commanded his servants, saying, mark now ye, when Amnon's heart is merry, and when I say, smite Amnon, and kill him, fear not. Have not I commanded you, be courageous and be valiant? So here he is. He's going to kill his brother, and of course the party happens, and right when Amnon is drunk, he tells his servants, and they kill Amnon. And the servants of Absalom did this unto Amnon, and all the king's sons arose, and every man got up from his mule and fled. They must have thought there were attackers. They must have thought that there was an enemy in the camp, or that maybe they were under attack from the Ammonites or the Moabites or something. I don't know exactly what they thought, but they got up and left. And it came to pass that where they were in the way, they were all coming back, that someone told them, Absalom has slain all the king's sons. And I misspoke there. They knew that Absalom was now killing the sons. So let me go back. This wasn't about the Moabites and Ammonites. They said Absalom has killed all the king's sons, and there's no one of them left, and David becomes distraught. The king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and his servants stood by with their clothes rent. Then Jonadab, here's this guy, but he was on Amnon's side. Now he's flipping the coin, flipping allegiance. He comes in and says, let not my lord suppose that they have slain all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the appointment of Absalom, this has been determined from this day that he forced himself on his sister Tamar. Let not my lord the king take this to his heart, to think that all the king's sons were dead, for Amnon alone is dead. So he thought, he was told that all the kings had been murdered by Absalom. And now he's finding out it's only Amnon because of what Amnon has done. Once again, David is silent. He's letting this vengeance. He let this cook. He let this boil. And now the pot came up. The idea that this should have been handled through the law of God. But instead, the king is not moving. The king isn't. It's interesting. We don't see through the rest of this book that David calls out to Jehovah like he did when he was running, like he did when he was going from Saul, like he did when he was facing Philistines and Moabites and Ammonites and Amalekites and Philistines. When he was fighting with these people, he was calling out to God continually. Now he doesn't talk to God at all. In fact, I'm going to keep an eye out. I can't think of a place anywhere from here on where he calls on Jehovah. So it's interesting how we see There's no discussion of God. You've had all this conspiracies working up. Absalom flees to Geshur. He moves out of the area, so he's away from the king. And Absalom fled, and the young men that kept the watch lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, there were people coming by the hill. And Jonadab said to the king, behold the king's son, as the servant has said so. So the idea that they all went to Absalom's house. Absalom kills Amnon. All the sons leave, but before they can get home, the tidings came that all the sons were dead. Then Jonadab says, no, it's not all the sons, only Amnon. Then he goes, look. And David looks, and the king's sons are coming over. And it came to pass, as soon as he had made an end of speaking, that behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all of his servants wept very sore. But Absalom fled and went over to Geshur. And David mourned for his son. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the soul of David longed for Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. So the idea that he longed for Absalom, he loved Absalom. Now he got over the death of Amnon. Maybe he did love Amnon. It doesn't say one way or another, but he didn't let that death fester and become vengeance. He loves his son. This father love is a very strong and powerful thing, and it's going to blind him. He allows himself to be blinded. You'll see several times in here. But he's been blinded up to now. Ever since he did that with Bathsheba, he kind of blinded himself. He didn't call out to God, and he doesn't call out to God. And things are just getting worse. And we see that evil is being raised up. God is not committed to David like he was. He's still committed. You're going to be a king, and you're going to have this thing. But we see that the kingdom is taken from him for a while. We see Absalom coming into play. And spoilers, we'll see later where he loses his son to death because Absalom is murdered at the end of the book. And so what happens with sin? What was the wages of sin is death. And we see this not just a quick death, but there's this slow death. There's this God turning against, God allowing this evil to happen. And so we see Amnon with Tamar. We see the conspiracy with Absalom. And this story's going to move forward. And now he has a son. He has one son that's dead. He's got another one that's off living in another kingdom. And he's been gone for 3 years. And his heart longs for Absalom. There's a lot of pain here. This is one of the things that I'm struggling with the grid work ideologue, is that you see this text. It's hard not to draw conclusions that are preset. It's hard not to go with the sermons that I've heard 100 times about different things. It's hard not to just go with what's been said here, to see what the grid says, to see what the feelings are, to feel those emotions as the characters are feeling them, and see God's anger, see God working behind the scenes, see God's promises. It's funny that God will also keep his negative promises. I will promise that I will tear you down. I'll promise that I will bring evil to your house. God keeps his good promises that I will build you and grow, but he will also keep promises to some people that I will tear you down because of your sin. There is no middle ground. God works for you or God works against you. And here we see that with this. And again, it's kind of hard for me to not give conclusions, not to draw heavily on theology or sermons, to stick with the grid. It's hard to do at this point. And it's going to be moving on through these stories, trying to stick with the grid and not the fancifications, the fancy that we've had from sermons, well-meaning sermons, trying to make all of this fit into our minds. But read what it says. There's sadness here. There's very deep emotions. Let it move you. Let it touch you. That's the power of the grid. It's not information, but the emotives and the real feelings of these characters and the real feelings of